May the beautiful angels bless you with endless love, bright healing energy, and pure peace today. Welcome to the channel Angel's Message for You. I am so happy your soul guided you to this safe space right now. Please listen to me very carefully, because the universe has brought you here for a massive reason. Have you been feeling totally drained lately? Like you are just waiting for the other shoe to drop in your love life? But you cannot quite figure out why. Make sure you stay with me and listen until the very absolute end of this message. Do not skip away. What I am about to share is the huge missing puzzle piece you have been looking for. If you leave early, you might miss the exact sign and the clear truth your guardian angels have been trying to send you all month. This is not just another random message. Something highly urgent, something totally life-changing is unfolding right this very second around your soulmate's family. And if you ignore this loving warning, you might never forgive yourself, because the truth of what they are hiding is much darker and heavier than you ever imagined. Right now, their family is trapped in a crazy storm of hard decisions. They are backed into a tight corner where no easy path exists anymore. They tried to sweep things under the rug, but that never works for long. A huge chain of wild events has completely tied their hands, leaving them with absolutely no choice but to take a step that is going to shake up everything around you. What happens next is not only going to impact their daily lives, it is going to forever change your beautiful destiny. 2. The heavy secrets surrounding their family were hidden away for way too long. They were sealed tightly behind closed doors because people cared too much about what the neighbors might think. But now, all those dark shadows are breaking wide open. They are pouring out into the open air and demanding your attention. Heaven has seen all of this happening, and the universe absolutely refuses to let you stay in the dark anymore. Even as you sit here right now, totally unaware, powerful spiritual forces are moving behind the scenes. Your soulmate's family is preparing to make a massive decision that will either bring you and your person so much closer or try to push you apart in ways you cannot even imagine. You must be emotionally ready to face what is coming. Take a deep breath right now. A heavy storm of complete silence has surrounded their household lately. You know, that kind of thick, awkward silence where everyone is just walking on eggshells? But silence cannot hide the pure truth forever. Someone very close to them is forcing a final demand, making them choose right now, and the heavy weight of this forced choice is tearing them all apart inside. They cannot easily explain it to you yet, but I need you to know that every single tear they have shed in secret is deeply connected to you. Your soulmate has been carrying a giant, heavy burden in their heart for a long time. It is a burden they desperately wanted to protect you from. They thought if they just stayed quiet, they could keep you safe from the family drama. But now, the exact moment has arrived where playing it safe and protecting you is no longer possible. You are about to see a whole new side of their life that was totally hidden from your eyes. My beautiful, beloved child of the universe, destiny is weaving a very intense thread through your grand love story. The tall walls that always seemed to separate you two are finally falling down. And very soon, you will fully understand why things were delayed for so long. You will see why your paths seemed completely blocked, and why their long silence felt so heavy and unbearable. It was never just random bad luck. It was universe-guided preparation. And now, this huge uncovering of the truth is knocking at your front door with the loud force of thunder. The choice their family is making right now really only has two possible endings. They either have to sacrifice everything they built, or they have to finally reveal the honest truth. And either way, your everyday life will never be exactly the same again. They honestly tried their best to shield you, but fate and the stars have decided that you simply must know the truth. The quiet whispers going around their home right now are filled with deep fear, heavy regret, and desperate, messy attempts to just hold everything together with tape and glue. Yet, even with all their exhausting efforts, everything falling apart is just bound to happen. Your soulmate is fighting a very quiet, silent war inside their own mind. You cannot easily see this tough battle, but it is a huge fight between true love and family loyalty. It is a fight between their family's social survival and their own heart's deep devotion to you. This right here is the major breaking point. This is the exact moment that defines whether they will stand up tall for what is right, or if they will shatter under the heavy family pressure. My beloved child, heaven is watching this entire situation so closely. Your guardian angels know exactly how much hearing this truth might sting at first, but they also know without a doubt that you are strong enough to handle it. The fire that is coming up ahead is not meant to burn you down. It is meant to totally clear and clean up your path. Every single little thing happening right now is leading you straight toward the true, unconditional love you were always promised by the universe. But for that amazing love to fully show up in your real life, these hidden family chains must break first. And trust me, the loud sound of them breaking will echo all through your life very soon. You are safe. The quiet cries of their family echo in the silent night. But heaven has already recorded every single sound and every single tear. Their long, sleepless nights, their totally trembling hands, their restless pacing back and forth across the bedroom floor. All of it is deeply tied to you and your energy. They simply cannot run away from this anymore because the clear truth is already written in the stars. Your soulmate knows exactly what is coming. And even though they try so hard to hide it with a fake smile on their face, their tired eyes carry the heavy weight of it all. Behind every forced, polite smile, and behind every quiet, distant moment, lies a giant storm that is about to touch your life. You are standing right on the very edge of a huge discovery, and absolutely nothing can stop it from coming out. Now, my beloved child, please understand that this is no ordinary, everyday situation. The choice that has been totally forced upon their family is sharp, heavy, and it cannot be taken back once it is made. They must decide between the comfortable safety of their blood relatives and the beautiful, bright destiny of their own heart. This is exactly why heaven chose to reveal all of this to you today. Because when the big truth finally comes out, it will happen so fast, suddenly, just like a bright flash of lightning in the middle of the dark night. And if you are caught totally off guard, the sudden shock might really break your heart. The angels want you to be ready. You need to know that the people surrounding their family are not all good, loyal people. Some of them smile sweetly on the outside, but they hold a lot of toxic, bad energy and hidden jealousy on the inside. These sneaky, hidden enemies are the exact ones pushing the family so hard toward this painful, messy choice. Your soulmate's family has carried these dark secrets for years and years, burying them so deep in the dirt so no one could ever expose them. But the grand time of exposure has finally arrived, and the high vibrations of heaven will absolutely not allow this toxic energy to remain hidden in the dark anymore. The heavy chains of family silence are literally being torn wide open at the exact same time you are reading this message. My beloved child, please do not think for one single second that this message found you by pure accident. It is a loving, divine warning. It is a gentle preparation from your spirit guides for what is about to go down. Very soon, you will clearly see how every little thing is perfectly connected. All the annoying delays, the weird distance between you two, the random tears you cried. It all makes sense now. Your soulmate will simply not be able to hide behind silly excuses any longer. Their family is going to have absolutely no choice but to reveal what they never, ever wanted you to know. And once you finally hear the whole story, your gentle heart will never look at them the same way again. Everything will shift into the light. Right now, their family home feels just like a crazy battlefield. Every single word spoken in that house is dripping with thick, heavy tension. Every look across the dinner table carries heavy secrets that are just too painful to explain out loud. And yet, all of this wild, chaotic energy is leading directly toward you. Your soulmate has been pulled and stretched between two totally different worlds for so long. They feel the strong duty to please their family, but they also have this deep, burning love for you. But right now, that wobbly balance is completely collapsing, and the honest truth will finally decide their future path. This is the big moment of no return. My beloved child, please do not be afraid of the loud storm that is about to strike. Your angels are holding your hand through it all, because from the messy ashes of this wild chaos, a brand new, beautiful beginning is going to be born. What is falling apart right now is only making room for what is truly meant to be. Even as the dark energy tries its best to silence their beautiful love for you, the universe is busy setting magical things into motion. What you are about to receive is not just a stressful truth bomb. It is the golden key to unlocking your happy destiny with them. The universe is clearing the way. Your soulmate's family truly believes they are making some kind of noble sacrifice right now, but they do not even realize that heaven has a much bigger, much better plan. Their stressful, forced choice is only skimming the surface of what is really going on. Right underneath all the drama lies the beautiful, divine alignment of your life path. What looks like a total disaster right now is actually the universe doing some heavy construction work for your future. Every single roadblock that pops up against you is secretly paving a smooth, golden road forward. Every door that slams shut in your face is just the universe turning you around to face the right door, the true doorway to your happy destiny. This is exactly why the emotional pain feels so heavy and unbearable sometimes, because it is literally stretching your soul to make enough room for the giant miracle that is waiting just ahead. My beautiful, beloved child, please know that the angels are already surrounding you in a tight circle of love. They are placing a warm, glowing shield of light right over your heart, totally preparing you for what you are about to hear. You might cry some tears, and that is perfectly okay. Let them flow. But you will rise up from this so much stronger and brighter than ever before. And when all the messy dust finally settles on the ground, your soulmate is going to stand right in front of you with nothing but the pure, naked truth in their loving eyes. They will no longer be able to fake it, no longer be able to run away, and no longer be able to choose the easy, silent way out. That is the exact moment heaven's beautiful shall totally unfold in your real life. Their family is standing right at the edge of a choice that feels like a sharp knife pressed right against their soul. The walls of their comfortable little bubble are totally closing in on them, and every single passing minute brings them so much closer to their dirty secrets being pushed into the bright sunlight. What they desperately tried to sweep under the rug is about to pop right back out. My beloved child, heaven is kindly showing you all of this ahead of time, so you are not completely caught off guard when the news drops. You truly need to know that what is coming will definitely shake both of you to your very core. It is going to test your strong love, your deep patience, and your true destiny together. The voices echoing inside their home right now are filled with loud arguments, messy tears, and fearful whispers. Nothing feels safe or stable for them anymore, and absolutely no one can pretend everything is just fine and dandy. This is the exact major breaking point they have been so terrified of for years. And yet, through all of this messy chaos, your spirit guides keep pointing you straight toward one solid fact. Your soulmate simply cannot escape your pure love. No matter how tough or heavy their family's choices become, the magnetic pull of destiny will still drag them right back to you. The universe created this bond, and humans cannot break it. Right now, their nosy relatives are holding on to dark secrets that burn like hot fire right inside their chests. They honestly think that by hiding the truth, they are somehow protecting your soulmate from getting hurt. But the truth is, this toxic secret is just poisoning all of them from the inside out. The longer they try to keep it locked away, the more explosive and painful the final boom is going to be. My beloved child, the powerful angels of truth have already completely stepped into this messy situation. Every single little hidden lie is currently being dragged out into the bright, warm sunlight, and absolutely no dark shadow can survive the light. The fake, happy masks they all wore for so many years are literally being ripped right off their faces. Your soulmate feels like they are being totally ripped apart. One side of their brain yells at them to stand by their blood relatives and play it safe. The other side of their soul pulls them so strongly, right back into your warm energy. And in the middle of this awful storm, their tears fall quietly onto their pillow every single night. This is the exact reason why heaven really needed you to open and read this message right now today. Because when this wild storm finally reaches its boiling point, it is going to demand a solid choice. And I promise you that final choice is going to lead them directly back to your front door. The waiting is almost over. Even the random neighbors living all around them can totally sense that something is very wrong over there. They can hear the muffled shouting through the thin walls. They can feel the thick, heavy awkwardness when the family steps outside to get the mail. Everyone in town is watching them, but nobody truly knows the deep, heavy weight of this emotional battle behind closed doors. Your soulmate's gentle heart is feeling so heavy right now. But please know that heaven is constantly whispering sweet strength and courage right into their tired spirit. They are about to step up to the plate and face the absolute hardest truth of their entire life. And whether they stumble for a minute or stand up tall and strong, the final winning outcome is already set in stone in your destiny. My beloved child, please always remember this. The bold truth is never meant to ruin your life. It is meant to totally free you from fake illusions and gently guide you into a real, solid love that is tested, true, and totally unshakable. The temporary pain is only the bumpy start of something so much greater and sweeter. What you previously thought was a sad ending is actually going to be a gorgeous, divine new beginning. The universe is stepping in. Their family having absolutely no easy choice left is the exact loving push that will finally bring your soulmate right back to your safe side. Everything is working in your favor. Their family might foolishly think they are totally controlling this whole situation, but let me tell you, the universe just laughs at their tiny little human plans. For every single human choice that goes wrong, there is a powerful, magical divine override ready to fix it. And that grand override is already fully in motion for you right now. My beloved child, you are going to start seeing so many magical signs all around you that totally confirm this message. Look out for weird, happy coincidences, totally unexpected sweet words, sudden shifts in the room's energy, finding dimes or feathers on the ground. It is all pointing straight toward the real truth. Heaven is perfectly weaving everything together like a beautiful tapestry. Your soulmate is getting ready in their own quiet way, whether their conscious mind realizes it yet or not. They are being strongly pulled into a beautiful destiny that they simply cannot fight against anymore. It is a bright, clear path that leads directly right back to your warm heart. Their family's stubborn resistance cannot stop this train. And when the big moment finally hits, the clear truth will crack open just like loud thunder on a summer night. What the family secretly hoped would tear you two apart forever is actually going to act like superglue, binding your souls totally closer than ever before. This is the universe's ultimate plot twist just for you. The crazy storm inside their living room is definitely not quiet anymore. Mean words are turning into loud shouts, and those loud shouts are turning into messy, broken tears. Every single corner of their home carries the low, heavy vibration of fear and total confusion right now. My beloved child, destiny is pressing down on their shoulders with a huge force that they just cannot push back against. The final choice they are being forced to make right now is going to ripple out across your entire life, just like huge ocean waves crashing loudly onto the sandy beach. This whole situation is way bigger than what any human can control. The absolute core foundation of their whole family unit is shaking and trembling right now. Promises they made in secret to each other are totally falling apart, and old loyalties are being tested like never before. This is not just a random hard time. This is a massive, divine uncovering unfolding right before your eyes. And through all of this drama, the sweet message from the angels remains crystal clear. You must protect your energy and be emotionally prepared. What they tried so hard to hide from you is going to march right up to your front door. And once the truth is out in the open air, it cannot ever be stuffed back into the dark closet. Do not worry, you are divinely protected. Your soulmate feels this crazy pressure literally crushing their chest right now. Every single breath they take carries the terrible weight of big decisions they never, ever wanted to face in their lifetime. They are being rudely forced to walk down a bumpy path they absolutely do not want to walk down. My beautiful, beloved child, you really need to understand in your heart that this whole mess is not a punishment from the universe. Not at all. This is pure, necessary preparation. Heaven is carefully shaping your magical love story with total precision, using even the painful, hard moments as a sharp tool for perfect alignment. What feels like a huge loss right now is actually a divine redirection toward your true happiness. Those negative, toxic people thought they could easily use this family drama to permanently break your special bond. But boy, did they totally underestimate the powerful hand of the angels. Every single sneaky attempt to keep you two separated is magically turning into the exact fuel that is driving you right back into each other's arms. The forced choice that the family cannot escape is going to blast open new doors for you that you never even dreamed could open. This is the funny, beautiful paradox of how the universe works. Things totally falling apart leads straight into a beautiful rebirth. A temporary heartbreak leads directly to a forever, totally committed union. Trust the process. Their nervous relatives are all whispering in deep fear right now, super worried about what the whole town will think if the ugly truth gets out. They are so afraid of being exposed, of facing hard judgment, and of dealing with consequences they simply cannot run away from anymore. But heaven and the angels have already decided that the clear, bright truth absolutely must shine today. My beloved child, there is a giant spiritual reason why this specific message popped up on your screen today. It is because the big moment of the truth coming out is way closer than anybody realizes. The sand in the hourglass of destiny has almost completely run out. Your soulmate is feeling super restless right now, totally unable to just sit still or find any peace of mind. They can feel the heavy storm clouds rolling in. They feel this crazy, magnetic pull drawing them straight toward your energy, but they honestly do not even know how to explain it out loud yet. Please know that their recent silence is absolutely not them rejecting you. It is just the exhausting weight of all the garbage they are carrying on their shoulders. Very soon, you are going to hear honest words from them that will totally change the way you see this entire situation. Those words might cut a little deep at first, but they are also the exact words that will finally start the real healing process. The angels will personally make sure the pure truth reaches your ears. You are so loved. Please know that your beautiful guardian angels are standing right next to you, guarding your energy even as you read this. They are lovingly preparing your gentle heart, wrapping it up in an unseen warm blanket of pure strength and light. My beloved child, this crazy moment is perfectly, divinely timed. Absolutely nothing is happening a minute too early, and nothing is a minute too late. Everything is rolling out exactly the way the universe planned it from day one. Even the messy, annoying chaos is just a small part of the beautiful, grand design for your life. Your soulmate's family might wrongly think they are the ones in total control of the steering wheel right now. They might truly believe that their forced, panicked decision is the final word on the matter. But the real truth is the universe holds the only final word. And that final word is already safely written in the stars. Your beautiful union with your person simply cannot be denied by anyone. Whatever wild drama happens next is only going to strongly push your soulmate right into the loving arms of their true destiny. And those safe, loving arms are totally yours. Claim your power today. The heavy silence hanging in their house right now has become totally unbearable for everyone. It is like even the painted walls seem to be crying out with dark secrets that just cannot be kept bottled up anymore. The intense pressure of the truth is getting ready to totally explode like a volcano at any given second. My beloved child, what is about to go down is not just going to affect their tiny circle. It is going to crash right into your daily life like a loud, wild thunderstorm. This specific truth has been quietly circling around your energy for a while now, just waiting for the perfect, divine time to strike. And guess what? That perfect time is right now. Your soulmate's family foolishly thought they could bury this whole mess in the backyard forever. But heaven is loudly pulling back the heavy velvet curtain, ripping away every single fake disguise, and forcing the cold, hard reality right out into the bright, open spaces. Absolutely nobody can run and hide when divine timing rings the doorbell. And when this huge truth bomb finally drops, some fragile egos will definitely shatter, but your true, beautiful destinies will finally align. The emotional pain you have been feeling lately will very soon turn into the exact golden key that unlocks your absolute greatest blessing in love. Keep your faith strong. Your soulmate is literally trembling on the inside right now, totally caught in a tug-of-war between deep fear and real love. They know deep down in their soul that once the truth slips out of their mouth, they can never, ever go back to the fake, comfortable life they used to know. Their stubborn silence is finally breaking down, and very soon, totally honest words are going to pour right out of them like warm fire. My beautiful, beloved child, please prepare your energy because this grand moment is not just about them fixing their family drama. It is really about you finally stepping fully into the amazing, powerful role the universe has totally chosen for you. Your calm, grounded strength is going to be their only safe anchor when everything else around them totally falls apart. Those toxic people who thought they could casually play silly games with your destiny are about to be totally exposed to the light. Every single hidden betrayal, every sneaky little lie, and every fake plastic mask is going to fall right onto the floor. And the whole world is going to clearly see who truly stands in the light of truth and who is stuck in the dark. In that exact moment, your soulmate is going to finally realize that you were their true, safe home all along. Their tired tears will naturally run straight to you. Their exhausted heart will totally collapse right into your open arms because heaven always meant for it to be exactly this way. The universe never makes mistakes. Even right now, toxic whispers are floating around in their town, bringing up their family name. Nosy people are talking, spreading dark shadows, and trying their hardest to twist the real story before it even reaches your ears. But do not worry, your angels will make 100% sure that you hear the real, uncut truth, and not the fake lies from the gossipers. My beloved child, the powerful angels are walking 10 steps ahead of you right now, totally sweeping and clearing your path. Nobody is going to be able to trick you or deceive your smart heart anymore. Every single fake mask worn by anyone around their family is being totally ripped apart, piece by little piece. Your soulmate might still seem a little cold or distant on the outside right now, but trust me, they are fiercely fighting for your love in complete silence. Their deep love for you is so much stronger than this crazy family storm. It is way stronger than the sneaky betrayal, and definitely stronger than their own fear. It is exactly that inner strength that is going to march them right back to your front porch. This is exactly why your spirit guides are loudly telling you today, please do not give up on this yet. Do not lose your beautiful faith. What totally feels like complete destruction right now is actually the exact rich, fertile dirt where your true love is going to take deep root and totally bloom into something totally unshakable. The night just up ahead of you holds a massive turning point. The dark, heavy energy might try its best to completely overwhelm them, but the bright, warm divine light is already easily breaking right through the cracks. What honestly seemed totally impossible just yesterday is going to become a totally undeniable reality by tomorrow. My beautiful, beloved child, you absolutely must stand tall and strong as their family's messy truth totally explodes out in the open. Their sad tears are going to seek out your warm comfort, and their temporary brokenness is going to desperately need your grounded, calm strength. This is the exact beautiful, supportive role that heaven has been preparing you for all along. Every single tough heartbreak you had to endure in your past was just universe boot camp, training your soul for this exact wonderful moment. Every single toxic betrayal you successfully survived in the past was just building up the shiny, strong armor you are wearing right now. Absolutely none of your past pain was wasted. It was all preparing your heart to hold this massive love. And very soon, when your soulmate finally stands right before you, completely stripped naked of all their heavy secrets and silly family lies, you are going to clearly see their true heart in its absolute purest, most beautiful form. That is the exact magical moment that destiny will finally breathe fresh, amazing life into your love story. Be ready to receive. The giant moment has finally arrived where totally staying silent simply cannot protect them from the mess anymore. Their family recently gathered all together in a dimly lit, stressful room. Their voices were totally trembling, and their eyes were filled to the brim with raw fear. The crazy choice they finally made in that room was definitely not born from anything good. It was born from total, pure desperation to save their own image. My beloved child, this frantic decision carries such a heavy weight that it is going to totally shake the entire foundation of their everyday lives. They foolishly believe they are just doing what is totally necessary to survive. But the universe knows it is going to cause massive, crazy ripples way beyond what they can control. And guess what? That huge wave is going to wash right up to your feet next. Your soulmate literally sat totally frozen in that chair as the toxic words fell around the room like loud thunder. They absolutely never, ever wanted any of this drama, but their panicked family basically forced their hand. Their deep love for you and their crazy loyalty to their family totally collided, leaving some temporary emotional scars that just cannot be easily erased overnight. But listen closely. In that exact same stressful moment, their true heart totally whispered your name out loud in their mind. Even while being rudely forced down this painful, bumpy path, their inner soul still reached straight out for your warm energy, completely proving that a destiny guided by the stars simply cannot ever be silenced. Love always wins out. This messy decision was made to protect something totally silly, like their public image, but it came at the totally unfair cost of your soulmate's actual happiness. They chose a fake survival, but it is a totally miserable survival, totally drenched in deep sorrow and regret. What they honestly thought would save their family reputation is actually going to totally push them right to the edge of an emotional collapse. My beloved child, please do not ever mistake this current stressful bump in the road as the final ending. It is absolutely not over. It is only the starting trigger, the crazy opening act of a massive truth-telling that has been waiting in the wings way too long. The universe's storm has really only just begun to clear the air. Your soulmate feels like they are being ripped right in two. They feel totally bound by their toxic family blood, yet so powerfully pulled by their pure love for you. They feel like a little bird trapped in a tight cage completely built by their own family. But do not worry, because heaven is already busy forging the perfect golden key to open that door. And that key is your loving energy. This is exactly why your angels are speaking so loudly and clearly to you today. The huge, unstoppable chain reaction has already been triggered, and absolutely nothing on earth will stop it from reaching your beautiful life and setting things right. Stay peaceful. Their totally panicked family thought they could easily hide the real truth just by making this sneaky little move. They honestly believed that staying silent and keeping a far distance would somehow protect their secret forever. But heaven has written a completely different, much better script for this movie. My beautiful, beloved child, the clear, bright truth is absolutely going to rise up to the surface, no matter how deep in the mud they tried to bury it. Silly little lies simply cannot last more than a minute when the bright, warm, divine light of the universe shines right on them. Every single little hidden detail of this mess is already rolling out on a red carpet straight toward you. Your soulmate knows deep down in their gut that they cannot possibly keep you completely in the dark for much longer. Their tired eyes carry the heavy emotional pain of all these toxic secrets, but their inner soul is loudly screaming out for total release and freedom. Very soon, those quiet, internal screams are going to magically turn into totally honest, totally open confessions to you. When the whole, real truth is finally spoken out loud in the open air, it might pinch a tiny bit at first, but it is also going to bring massive, total healing to both of your hearts. It will quickly strip away all the fake illusions and finally clear the runway for the totally beautiful path that heaven always promised you from the start. You are so close. The family's messy, selfish choice was totally supposed to separate you two for good. But destiny has a funny way of twisting things up in the most unexpected, magical ways. What those toxic people thought would completely end your beautiful bond is actually the exact specific thing that is magnetically pulling you two closer and closer together every single day. Every single crazy roadblock they try to throw in your way is actually secretly serving heaven's totally perfect master plan for your love life. My beloved child, their frantic decision has already set a massive, beautiful chain of tiny miracles right into motion for you. The crazy chaos and drama you see playing out right now is definitely not random bad luck. It is perfectly calculated and totally controlled by the divine angels. Every single tear that falls is just going to nicely water the rich soil of your future beautiful union. Your totally overwhelmed soulmate might not be able to fully see it right this second, but the universe is literally backing them into a tight corner. And it is a special corner where the absolutely only way out is to turn around and walk straight toward you. That is the incredible, undeniable beauty of how destiny actually works. It cleverly uses even the most painful, stressful family moments to safely guide true love home. And when your person finally comes walking back to you, feeling a little broken but totally exposed and honest, you are going to finally see the absolute pure, shining truth of their heart. No more silly lies, no more fake, plastic masks. It will be only pure truth, totally raw, open, and completely undeniable. The love you deserve is finally here. The quiet, nervous whispers in their house have completely turned into a thick, heavy silence that feels heavy enough to literally crush the air out of the room. Absolutely nobody in that family dares to speak up openly about the giant elephant in the room. Yet every single one of them knows that the massive storm is totally unavoidable now. The huge, heavy truth is just sitting right there at the dinner table like an unseen, awkward guest, just waiting patiently to be loudly acknowledged. My beautiful, beloved child, you're amazing. Soulmate feels like they are totally suffocating under the massive weight of it all right now. Their sad, tired eyes easily betray the big things that their lips are still too scared to actually say out loud. Every single frustrated glance they shoot toward their messy family is totally filled with deep, silent anger and totally deep regret. The explosive moment of eruption is so incredibly close now. The crazy decision they were forced to make was only meant to shield the family's fake, perfect image, but it totally cost your soulmate their own inner peace. They unfairly sacrificed their true happiness for simple social survival. But that kind of fake survival has completely turned into heavy, rusty chains around their ankles. And let me tell you, those heavy chains are rattling louder and louder every single dark night. Heaven is constantly watching this whole mess very closely, kindly recording every single tear, every single stressful, sleepless night, and every single sweet word they left unsaid to you. And very soon, this totally accurate record of the truth will be loudly played back right before your very own eyes. You will see it all clearly. Your soulmate feels exactly like they are literally drowning in a deep, dark sea of totally unfair family expectations. Their controlling family pulls them hard in one direction, while their own beating heart strongly pulls them in the total opposite direction, and the rope they are holding onto is totally fraying and tearing. They simply cannot stretch their energy any further without totally breaking down. My beloved child, destiny has been totally sweet and patient with them, but the universe will definitely not wait around forever. This stressful, toxic tug-of-war simply cannot last much longer. The bright, honest truth is going to finally explode just like bright, beautiful fireworks high up in the night sky. Even their casual friends hanging around them are beginning to easily sense the weird, heavy tension in the air. Even total outsiders at the grocery store can totally feel that something is very wrong over there, even if they don't know all the messy, juicy details of it. The dark shadows are whispering so much louder each and every day. And right smack in the middle of all that exhausting chaos, your beautiful name constantly burns like a bright candle right inside their chest. No matter how incredibly hard their toxic family tries to pull them away from you, the universe just happily keeps right on writing you perfectly into their future love story. You are meant to be. The grand night is quickly coming where their tall, fake walls of total silence are going to completely collapse onto the floor. They absolutely will not be able to contain the intense emotional pressure for another second longer. Their tired voice will finally break open, and the sweet, honest truth will totally pour right out of them just like a massive, unstoppable flood of water. My beautiful, beloved child, heaven and your guides never, ever planned to allow this messy secret to stay totally hidden forever. It is a universal law that what is sneakily concealed in the dark shadows absolutely must be fully revealed in the bright, warm sunlight. And that gorgeous, healing light is reaching its warm rays out to you right now. Your soulmate's family fears this huge public exposure more than anything else in the world. They totally know that once the real, entire truth finally reaches your open ears, their tight, toxic control over your person is completely finished forever. That is exactly why they frantically tried to bury the secret so deeply in the dirt. But destiny and the universe just totally laugh out loud at any silly human attempts to bury what heaven has clearly chosen to bring into the light. The deeper and harder they desperately try to hide it, the absolute louder and stronger it will roar like a lion when it finally bursts to the surface. It is out of their hands now. That terrible, panicked decision they nervously made in that closed-off little room is already cracking apart right at the edges. It absolutely cannot hold the heavy weight much longer, because sneaky lies are incredibly fragile when you weigh them against the massive power of true, divine destiny. Their forced choice was really only a silly little delay tactic. It was absolutely never a permanent solution to their mess. My beloved child, please believe me when I say that every single ticking second on the clock is bringing you so much closer to the total, honest revelation. The grand, universal countdown has already officially begun, even though their totally clueless family does not even realize it yet. Heaven and the angels are happily pushing the bright truth right toward your front porch, just like a powerful, rising ocean tide. Your amazing soulmate's heart is totally preparing its courage to finally confess everything to you. They absolutely will not be able to hold their feelings back when the perfect, divine time strikes. The sweet, honest words will totally spill out of them, completely unstoppable and beautifully undeniable. And when those warm, totally true words finally reach your ears, your gentle soul is going to totally tremble, but definitely not in fear. You will tremble in pure, sweet recognition, because even through all the messy past pain, you are going to clearly see the universe's shiny fingerprint stamped right all over your amazing, unique love story. Everything happened for a beautiful reason. The tense air inside their family home has grown so much heavier lately, almost as if every single piece of furniture carries the exhausting weight of their dark secrets. Their whole family sits around the living room totally together, but their thick, awkward silence is so much louder than any actual screaming match. Something totally unspoken is literally breaking their family ties apart from the very inside out. My beautiful, beloved child, your sweet soulmate easily senses that all their fake control is totally slipping right through their fingers like dry sand. They simply can no longer pretend that everything in their life is totally fine and normal. The hot, bright truth is burning closer and closer to the very surface every single day. The panicked decision they rushed into was supposed to magically end all their fear, but instead, it has only totally multiplied their stress by a million. Every single new sunrise just adds bigger, deeper cracks to the super fragile, totally fake lie that they desperately built up. And very, very soon, those tiny cracks are going to naturally turn into a total, complete collapse. Heaven and the angels are totally forcing this exact thing to happen right now, because nothing toxic that is hidden in the dark can remain there forever. The bright truth is bravely marching forward, completely unstoppable, and getting totally ready to happily burst right into your beautiful life and clear the air. You are so ready for this. Their nosy, toxic relatives are still nervously whispering late at night, acting totally afraid of even their own weird shadows on the wall. They constantly speak of the harsh consequences, of all the messy things that absolutely cannot be magically undone once the big secret is fully revealed to the world. Deep, heavy fear has easily become their absolute closest daily companion. My beloved child, the angels happily show me their totally trembling, fearful voices right now. They are completely terrified because they finally know deep down that the honest truth does not just belong to them anymore. Completely belongs to you too. And they know that once you finally know the real story, absolutely everything in their dynamic will totally change forever. Your sweet soulmate walks around town every day with a gentle heart that feels as heavy as a huge rock. They totally love you so incredibly deeply, yet they temporarily feel chained to their messy family's bad choice. The extreme emotional pull is literally tearing their very bright soul in half right now. And yet, despite all of that crazy drama, pure destiny just continues to magically pull their energy right back into your warm orbit, no matter how strong or tight the toxic family's grip tries to become. True, beautiful love that is totally chosen by heaven simply cannot ever be erased by silly, temporary human fear. Love is the strongest energy in the entire universe. Every single little sign popping up all around them is loudly screaming that their borrowed time is totally running out. Their cell phones are constantly buzzing with weird, suspicious text messages. There are sudden, totally rushed family meetings happening behind heavy closed doors. Nervous, fast conversations that totally freeze and end the second someone else casually walks right into the room. They are honestly trying their absolute best to just hold it all together. But the truth is, the whole fake facade is completely falling apart at the seams. My beloved child, your totally exhausted soulmate is really beginning to emotionally break down under all this crazy pressure. Their quiet, frustrated tears just flow in complete silence, and their deep, late-night prayers totally beg the universe for an easy, safe way out of this crazy mess. They are actively asking their guardian angels right now to please give them the bold courage and total strength to finally come completely clean and tell you absolutely everything. The honest truth might feel a little dangerous to their ego, but it is totally 100% necessary for your future together. Without all this truth finally coming out into the open air, you simply cannot fully step into the amazing, beautiful destiny that is patiently waiting for both of you just around the corner. That is exactly why the universe and the angels absolutely will not let this garbage stay hidden for much longer. And when the sweet moment of truth finally arrives at your door, it will arrive super fast, just like a bright bolt of lightning. Totally fast, maybe a little shocking at first, but absolutely impossible for anyone to ignore. Your sweet, patient ears are finally going to clearly hear exactly what your deep, intuitive spirit has already suspected for such a very long time. Trust your gut. Their messy family's rushed choice was initially born straight out of the selfish fear of totally losing something they thought was super valuable, like their fake social status. They wrongly thought that acting completely silent would somehow easily protect them from the fallout, but that stubborn silence has actually become their absolute greatest enemy. The real truth is aggressively clawing its way right to the bright surface, totally demanding to be clearly known by you. My beautiful, beloved child, heaven and your sweet angels just want you to be totally grounded, calm, and ready when that big moment finally arrives. Because the specific words you are going to hear might temporarily sting your feelings at first, but right behind that tiny little sting lies your absolute, ultimate freedom. It is going to be total freedom for your beautiful heart, total emotional freedom for your tired soulmate, and pure, amazing freedom for your true love to finally grow beautifully without any heavy, toxic family chains holding it totally down. Your soulmate's totally exhausted eyes have already completely betrayed their fake smile. The real truth is already here, and your beautiful, happily ever after is finally stepping straight out of the dark shadows and into the warm, golden sunlight where you truly belong. Have faith, take a deep breath, and open your arms to receive this giant universe blessing today. Amen.